The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for kilometers, its crystalline walls reflecting the bioluminescent displays of 1,000 different species. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in their designated sectors, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and telepathic whispers. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Sarah Chen, the lone human representative, her small frame dwarfed by the massive alien delegates surrounding her. High Chancellor Vexthara's serpentine neck swayed as she addressed the assembly, her voice amplified through translation matrices that converted her meaning into every known language. "The motion before us today is simple," she announced, her 6 eyes fixed on Chen. "Species 7749H, designation human, must demonstrate their loyalty to the Council by surrendering their military, technology, and submitting to mandatory genetic modifications for galactic harmony." A chorus of approval rippled through the assembly. The Korthak delegation's insectoid limbs clicked in rhythm, while the gaseous ethereals pulsed with satisfied colors. Only the humans' few allies, the Centaurian traders and the enigmatic Void Watchers, remained silent. Ambassador Chen stood slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. The hall fell quiet, expecting the usual diplomatic protests or pleas for negotiation that had characterized humanity's participation in galactic politics for the past 50 years. Instead, she said nothing. The silence stretched. Seconds became minutes. Chen stood motionless, her dark eyes scanning the assembly with an expression that seemed to see through each delegate to something beyond. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed, yet something in her stillness made the massive Korthak warriors shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The human will respond," Chancellor Vexthara demanded, her voice carrying an edge of irritation. Chen's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile, but she remained silent. High Admiral Zephytos of the Hegemony Fleet leaned forward, his metallic exoskeleton gleaming. Perhaps the primitive species lacks the cognitive capacity to understand the question. The insult drew supportive rumbles from the assembly, but Chen's expression didn't change. She simply continued to stand, hands clasped behind her back, watching. In the observation galleries, junior diplomats from various species began to whisper among themselves. The humans' behavior was unprecedented. In the Council's 10,000-year history, no species had ever responded to a direct demand with complete silence. Minutes turned to an hour. The silence grew heavy, oppressive. Some delegates began to fidget. The ethereal's usually steady glow flickered with uncertainty. Even Chancellor Vexithara's confident posture began to waver. "The human will answer," she thundered. Chen tilted her head slightly as if considering the demand, then returned to her previous position. Still silent. Another hour passed. The Great Assembly Hall, designed to showcase the power and unity of the galactic community, began to feel different. The silence emanating from the small humans seemed to spread outward like ripples in a pond, infecting the very air with an uncomfortable tension. The Korthak Supreme General stood abruptly, his massive frame towering over the human. "This is intolerable. We demand compliance." For the first time, Chen moved. She turned her head slowly to look at the general, her gaze traveling up his imposing form to meet his compound eyes. Then, without breaking eye contact, she raised one eyebrow. The general stepped back involuntarily. It was then that the whispers began in earnest. In the corners of the assembly, older delegates who had lived through the legendary conflicts began to speak in hushed tones about human history. They spoke of a species that had fought wars lasting decades over principles, of soldiers who had held positions against impossible odds, choosing death over surrender, of a race that had colonized hostile worlds through sheer stubborn determination. They remembered the human phrase that had become legendary throughout the galaxy: "We shall not yield." As the third hour of silence began, something extraordinary happened. The junior delegate from the Altarian Republic stood and walked out of the assembly. Within minutes, 3 more species representatives followed, then a dozen. The trickle became a stream as delegates began filing out of the hall. Chancellor Vexithara watched in growing horror as her grand assembly dissolved around her. The silence from the single human had somehow become an indictment of the council itself. Without words, without protest, without even acknowledgement of the proceedings, Ambassador Chen had exposed the fundamental weakness in the council's authority. They could demand compliance, but they could not force it from a species that simply refused to engage. By the 6th hour, only the Council's core members remained. The great hall, designed to hold thousands, now felt cavernous and empty. The silence had taken on a weight of its own, pressing down on the remaining delegates like a physical force. Finally, High Chancellor Vexthara approached the human directly. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chen looked at her for a long moment, then spoke her first word since the session began. "I want you to understand something very important about my species." The Chancellor leaned forward eagerly. "We are not your subjects. We are not your allies. We are not your enemies." Chen's voice was calm, conversational. "We are simply other, and no amount of demanding, threatening, or posturing will change that fundamental truth." She paused, letting the words settle. "You asked for loyalty, but loyalty cannot be demanded, it must be earned. You asked for submission, but submission is antithetical to everything we are, so I gave you the only honest response possible." Chen smiled then, the expression both gentle and terrible. Silence. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at the nearly empty assembly hall. "When you're ready to speak with us as equals, you know where to find us." Her footsteps echoed in the vast chamber as she left, carrying with her the sound that had somehow become louder than any speech, the silence that had shaken the foundations of galactic authority itself. In the days that followed, the story spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Not the story of humanity's defiance, but the story of their silence. And in that silence, every species heard their own unspoken grievances against the Council's authority. The galaxy had learned something profound about the small, stubborn species from the third planet of an unremarkable star system. Humans, it seemed, were most dangerous not when they were shouting, but when they had nothing left to say.